Before the hidden truths begin, there is something worth remembering. There was a time when Americans rarely questioned what appeared on their dinner tables. The food was familiar, the labels were comforting. If something was served in schools, stocked in grocery stores, or advertised during America's favorite television programs, millions simply assumed it belonged there. Generation after generation welcomed these foods into their homes without hesitation, never imagining that decades later people would begin asking very different questions about what they had been told all along. After all, how could something so ordinary ever become extraordinary? How could something found in nearly every American kitchen quietly become the subject of growing curiosity among those who have spent their lives studying health, nutrition, and aging? And perhaps more importantly, why are these questions being asked now? There is something fascinating about reaching the age of 50. Time has a remarkable way of changing our perspective. The foods we loved as children become traditions we pass down to our families. The products we've trusted for 40 or 50 years become part of who we are. Some remind us of Saturday mornings spent around the breakfast table. Others bring back memories of family road trips, neighborhood diners, backyard barbecues, and holiday gatherings filled with laughter and familiar aromas drifting through the house. For generations, Americans were taught that convenience was progress. New foods promised healthier lives, brighter futures, and simpler mornings. Grocery store shelves became monuments to modern living, offering endless choices wrapped in comforting words and familiar colors. If everyone was eating something, surely there was nothing left to question. Or so we believed. Yet history has a curious habit of revealing its secrets slowly. What was once celebrated is sometimes viewed differently decades later. Ideas change, questions emerge. Time quietly uncovers stories hidden beneath ordinary things we have seen thousands of times before. The greatest surprises are often not found in distant places or forgotten history books. Sometimes they have been sitting quietly in our kitchens all along. Few people realize that some of the most remarkable discoveries about aging have little to do with exotic remedies or expensive solutions. Instead, they often begin with something much simpler: a closer look at the everyday choices that have traveled beside us for most of our lives. Choices we have rarely stopped to examine because they felt too ordinary to deserve a second thought. And perhaps that is what makes today's story so remarkable. Because this is not a story about rare ingredients or mysterious foods hidden away in distant countries. These are foods millions of Americans know by heart. Foods that have been welcomed into homes for decades. Foods that have appeared beside hospital beds, family celebrations, and everyday meals from coast to coast. Their stories stretch across generations of trust, tradition, and carefully crafted beliefs. Some became symbols of health, others became symbols of convenience. A few earned reputations so reassuring that questioning them seemed almost unnecessary. Almost. What most people never learned is that many foods carry histories far more fascinating than their labels could ever reveal. Hidden deep within their stories are surprising twists, forgotten details, and remarkable questions that few Americans were ever encouraged to ask. Not because anyone intended to create mystery, but because time itself has a way of uncovering truths that previous generations could never have imagined. There are moments in life when we look back and wonder why nobody ever told us certain things sooner. This may become one of those moments, especially after 50, when our relationship with food quietly changes in ways many of us rarely consider. The same meal enjoyed effortlessly decades ago may not be experienced quite the same way today. The body changes, priorities change. Even our understanding of what it means to age well continues evolving with every passing generation. Yet this story is not about fear. It is not about perfection, and it is certainly not about abandoning every familiar comfort that has accompanied us throughout our lives. It is about curiosity. It is about rediscovering the ordinary through entirely new eyes. Because hidden among America's most familiar foods are stories so remarkable they continue surprising people to this very day. Some reveal fascinating chapters of American history, others challenge ideas that have existed for generations, and a few may leave you wondering how something so commonplace managed to keep its secrets hidden in plain sight for so very long. As we journey through these 42 foods, their hidden histories will become increasingly difficult to ignore. What begins with intriguing discoveries will gradually reveal something far more extraordinary. With every chapter, the questions become more fascinating, the hidden truths become more remarkable, and by the time we arrive at the final revelations, you may never look at certain familiar foods in quite the same way again. The stories waiting ahead are not equal. Some will surprise you. Others may transport you back to childhood memories long forgotten. A few will challenge assumptions carried quietly for decades. And somewhere among them lies a hidden truth so unexpected that millions of Americans continue overlooking it every single day. That final revelation has been patiently waiting at the end of this journey all along. But before we arrive there, we must begin where every great documentary begins, with the stories hidden beneath the familiar. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are not hidden in ancient ruins or distant lands. Sometimes they are waiting quietly on the very shelves we have walked past our entire lives, asking only one simple question. What if there was far more to America's most familiar foods than anyone ever thought to tell us? At number 42, we begin with something that has quietly accompanied American mornings for generations: the brightly packaged toaster pastry. Long before convenience became a way of life, breakfast was an event. Families gathered around cast-iron skillets and steaming cups of coffee, while kitchens filled with familiar sounds and aromas. Yet as the decades passed, America fell in love with something entirely different. Convenience became the new luxury. Foods promised to save precious minutes while delivering the same comfort we remembered from childhood. Few products captured that promise more perfectly than the humble toaster pastry, waiting patiently inside countless kitchen cabinets across the country. What most people never stop to consider is that these foods were never designed merely to satisfy hunger. They were designed to fit an increasingly busy world, a remarkable achievement of food science, preservation, texture, and taste. After 50, however, many people begin noticing that what once felt effortless in their 20s no longer feels quite the same. Our relationship with sweetness, satiety, and satisfaction quietly changes with time. Hidden within this familiar American story lies an interesting reminder that convenience has always come with fascinating trade-offs. And perhaps even more remarkable is the fact that some of America's most beloved pantry staples carry stories far older and far more surprising than their colorful boxes would ever suggest. Those stories become even more intriguing when we step into the canned food aisle that generations of Americans learned to trust without question. At number 41 waits a familiar sight that has occupied grocery store shelves for well over a century: canned fruit preserved in heavy syrup. During difficult times in American history, canned foods represented progress itself. They brought peaches to winter tables, offered comfort during uncertain years, and made seasonal foods available throughout the calendar year. Entire generations grew up believing these shining metal containers symbolized abundance and modern living. Grandmothers stored them in their pantries. Families proudly served them during holidays when fresh produce was difficult to find. Their story is one of innovation and practicality, and for many Americans, it remains wrapped in warm nostalgia. Yet, hidden beneath that remarkable history is a fascinating truth that time has quietly revealed. Somewhere along the way, preservation became something more than preservation. Texture changed, flavor changed, expectations changed. What was once considered an occasional luxury gradually became an everyday convenience. After 50, many people find themselves becoming increasingly interested in how foods make them feel, long after the final bite has been enjoyed. Curiously enough, the conversation surrounding familiar pantry staples has evolved alongside our understanding of aging itself. The question is no longer simply whether something tastes good. Increasingly, Americans have begun asking what stories their favorite foods have been carrying all along. And if canned fruit quietly transformed American kitchens, what happened next may be even more surprising. A food so common that millions of sandwiches have been built around it for decades. At number 40, we arrive at one of America's most enduring conveniences: processed deli meats. Few foods carry such powerful memories of everyday American life. School lunches carefully prepared before sunrise, family picnics beneath summer skies, late-night sandwiches assembled from whatever happened to remain in the refrigerator. For generations, sliced meats represented simplicity itself, a reliable companion of busy households across the nation. Their rise mirrors America's own story of industrial innovation and changing lifestyles. Advances in preservation made it possible to transport foods farther than ever before, while offering consistency from one kitchen to the next. In many ways, they became symbols of modern living. Yet history tells a different story when we look more closely. The journey from traditional preservation methods developed centuries ago to today's supermarket shelves is one filled with fascinating discoveries, changing technologies, and evolving conversations about food itself. After 50, people often become more attentive to the subtle ways their daily habits have accompanied them throughout life. Foods once chosen without a second thought begin inspiring entirely new questions. Hidden within this familiar story is an important reminder that some of America's most ordinary foods possess extraordinarily complex histories. What appears simple on the surface has often traveled through generations of innovation before reaching our plates. Yet remarkable as that story may be, it leads us towards something even more unexpected. A food whose reputation has transformed repeatedly throughout American history. At number 39 lies one of the most fascinating culinary contradictions of modern America: microwave popcorn. Its story begins not in movie theaters or living rooms, but thousands of years ago, among ancient civilizations that treasured corn long before the modern world ever existed. Centuries later, popcorn became woven into the fabric of American culture itself. Few experiences feel more nostalgic than the sound of kernels bursting to life while families gather around their favorite films. Entire generations associate its unmistakable aroma with comfort, celebration, and cherished memories shared across decades. Then came one of the greatest triumphs of convenience foods: the invention of microwave popcorn, bringing that timeless experience into American homes with unprecedented ease. Yet perhaps more remarkable than its popularity is the extraordinary journey it has taken over the years. Food packaging, flavor technologies, and manufacturing practices have all evolved dramatically as new questions emerged and previous assumptions were reconsidered. What many Americans never learned is that microwave popcorn has repeatedly found itself at the center of fascinating conversations about ingredients, food science, and how products quietly transform over time. Some concerns that once dominated headlines disappeared as manufacturers adapted. Others inspired entirely new approaches to production. Hidden within its story is a powerful reminder that foods are never frozen in history. They evolve alongside our understanding of them. After 50, that truth becomes increasingly meaningful. The foods we have known our entire lives often possess histories far more remarkable than we realize. And if something as ordinary as a bag of popcorn can reveal such an unexpected journey through time, then the hidden stories waiting ahead may prove even more surprising than anyone could imagine. There is something strangely comforting about the foods that survive the passage of time. Long after culinary trends have disappeared and grocery store shelves have transformed beyond recognition, certain familiar favorites remain almost untouched in the American imagination. Perhaps that is why so few people ever stop to wonder whether some of our oldest food traditions deserve a second look. The deeper we travel into the hidden histories of America's most familiar foods, the more remarkable their stories become. At number 38 waits a pantry staple whose origins stretch back thousands of years. Instant flavored oatmeal. For generations, oatmeal occupied a place of honor at the American breakfast table. Long before convenience foods dominated supermarket aisles, it represented simplicity itself. A humble bowl of oats warming cold winter mornings became part of childhood memories for millions of Americans. During the early 20th century, physicians frequently spoke of oats with admiration, praising their remarkable versatility and their place within traditional diets. There was something beautifully uncomplicated about it. Then modern convenience arrived. Food manufacturers discovered that breakfast could become even faster, sweeter, and more colorful. Small paper packets began appearing across the country, promising comfort in less than 2 minutes. Cinnamon apples, maple brown sugar, peaches and cream, each one seemed to capture the nostalgia of homemade breakfasts while requiring almost no effort at all. What few Americans ever considered was how dramatically the story had changed along the way. The conversation surrounding oatmeal quietly transformed from one about the grain itself to one about everything added around it. Hidden within its remarkable journey is an important reminder that foods are rarely static. They evolve alongside changing tastes, technologies, and expectations. After 50, many people begin appreciating simplicity in entirely new ways. Curiously enough, some nutrition experts have observed that it is often the familiar foods we least question that deserve the greatest curiosity. The story of oatmeal was never simply about breakfast. It became a story about how America learned to redefine convenience itself. Yet convenience would soon become even more irresistible when food no longer needed a spoon at all, but could instead arrive perfectly shaped and ready to pour from a brightly colored box. At number 37 lies one of America's most successful culinary inventions: sweetened breakfast cereals designed for adults. Although cereals are often associated with childhood nostalgia, countless varieties quietly market themselves toward older generations through carefully chosen words such as heart-healthy, wholesome, or naturally energizing. Their stories are among the most fascinating in American food history. During the late 19th century, breakfast reformers dreamed of creating foods that would transform the nation's eating habits forever. What began as a simple movement eventually became one of the largest industries in modern food production. Entire generations grew up believing that opening a cereal box each morning represented one of the healthiest ways to begin the day. The remarkable truth is that cereal has spent more than a century reinventing itself. Every generation received its own promises, wrapped carefully inside familiar packaging. Some emphasized fiber, others celebrated whole grains. Many quietly appealed to nostalgia itself, reminding consumers of breakfasts shared decades earlier around family kitchen tables. After 50, however, questions surrounding satisfaction, appetite, and changing nutritional priorities naturally become more interesting than they once were. Hidden within the history of breakfast cereals lies something few Americans realize. The greatest transformation was never the cereal itself, but the extraordinary power of marketing to shape our understanding of what breakfast ought to look like. History repeatedly reminds us that familiar foods often carry unfamiliar stories. Yet perhaps even more surprising is what happened when America attempted to reinvent one of its oldest culinary traditions by removing something people had trusted for generations. At number 36, we arrive at margarine, a product whose story has fascinated historians, scientists, and consumers for more than 150 years. There are few foods that have undergone such dramatic changes in public perception throughout American history. Once celebrated as a revolutionary alternative, margarine represented innovation at its finest. It became affordable, practical, and remarkably popular across American households. At different moments in history, it was viewed as modern, healthier, economical, and even futuristic. Entire debates unfolded across the nation regarding whether it belonged beside butter at the family dinner table. Some states once required margarine to be sold without its familiar yellow coloring, because lawmakers feared consumers might mistake it for butter itself. The controversy surrounding something as ordinary as a spread became nothing short of extraordinary. Yet time would reveal that margarine's story was far from finished. Advances in food science transformed its composition repeatedly throughout the decades, as manufacturers adapted to emerging discoveries and changing public expectations. What many Americans never learned is that margarine may be one of history's greatest examples of how nutritional conversations evolve from generation to generation. Ideas once accepted without question are sometimes reconsidered years later, only to evolve once again as our understanding improves. After 50, this lesson becomes particularly fascinating because it reminds us that no conversation about food remains frozen in time forever. Hidden truths often reveal themselves slowly, sometimes over decades rather than days. And if one humble spread can teach us that history rarely moves in straight lines, then the next familiar favorite tells an even more remarkable story about America's enduring love affair with sweetness. At number 35 waits a food so beloved that its very aroma can transport millions of Americans back to county fairs, baseball games, and cherished family celebrations. Store-bought glazed donuts. There is something almost magical about their story. Long before brightly lit display cases invited customers to peer through glass windows at impossibly perfect pastries, donuts carried a rich culinary heritage stretching back centuries. American soldiers famously earned the nickname Doughboys, while volunteers serving fresh donuts during wartime created memories that endured for generations. Few foods possess such deep emotional connections to American history itself. Modern donuts became symbols of celebration rather than necessity. Office gatherings, Sunday mornings, retirement parties, and countless conversations have unfolded over coffee and warm pastries shared among friends. Their popularity never depended solely upon taste. They represented comfort, generosity, and moments worth remembering. Yet, hidden within their fascinating journey lies an unexpected truth about how our relationships with indulgent foods naturally evolve over time. After 50, many people quietly discover that enjoyment itself begins changing in subtle and deeply personal ways. Foods that once accompanied busy mornings sometimes become occasional pleasures instead of daily rituals. Nostalgia remains, but perspective gently matures alongside experience. Perhaps that is one of the greatest hidden truths revealed throughout this journey. Not that familiar foods are villains waiting quietly within our kitchens, but that their stories are infinitely more remarkable than we were ever taught to imagine. History rarely deals in absolutes. Instead, it invites us to remain curious enough to keep asking questions. And as surprising as America's sweetest traditions may be, the hidden stories waiting ahead become even more extraordinary. Some have occupied our refrigerators for generations. Others have built billion-dollar industries upon promises millions continue trusting every single day. Their remarkable histories are still unfolding, and what comes next may challenge assumptions that have quietly followed us for much of our lives. As remarkable as America's relationship with convenience has been, perhaps its greatest culinary stories are not found in distant places or forgotten traditions, but within the quiet evolution of foods that millions continue welcoming into their homes every single day. The deeper we journey into these hidden truths, the more fascinating they become. Sometimes, what makes a food extraordinary is not what it contains, but the remarkable story of how it earned our trust in the first place. At number 34 sits a familiar companion of American sandwiches, family picnics, and backyard gatherings, commercially prepared potato salad. Its origins trace back centuries to European culinary traditions before finding an enduring home upon American tables. Few dishes have traveled so effortlessly through generations. It appeared beside grilled hamburgers on warm summer afternoons, occupied places of honor during holiday celebrations, and became an indispensable guest at neighborhood gatherings across the country. There is something undeniably nostalgic about potato salad, It reminds us that some foods are woven into our memories as much as our meals. Yet its modern story reveals something equally fascinating. Convenience gradually transformed a dish once prepared slowly within family kitchens into a product waiting patiently inside refrigerated grocery store displays. Recipes that once differed from one grandmother's table to another became carefully standardized for millions of consumers. Hidden within this transformation lies an extraordinary lesson about modern food itself. Preservation, texture, flavor, and consistency became quiet priorities of contemporary food science, allowing beloved traditions to survive increasingly busy lifestyles. After 50, however, many Americans begin rediscovering something curious about familiar comforts. Satisfaction is no longer measured solely by convenience, but increasingly by how foods fit within the rhythms of changing lives. Questions emerge naturally with age. Foods we have enjoyed for decades quietly invite us to understand them more deeply than ever before. What makes potato salad particularly remarkable is not merely its ingredients, but its fascinating journey through American history itself. A reminder that even our simplest traditions have stories worth telling. Yet another refrigerated favorite would eventually become one of the most celebrated symbols of health-conscious eating in modern America. At number 33, we arrive at flavored, low-fat yogurt, a food whose reputation has transformed repeatedly over the past half-century. There was a time when yogurt occupied only a modest corner of America's grocery stores. It was unfamiliar to many households and viewed by some as little more than a culinary curiosity. Few could have predicted that it would eventually become one of the most successful symbols of modern wellness culture. Advertising campaigns celebrated it. Magazine covers praised it. Entire supermarket aisles gradually expanded to accommodate its remarkable popularity. Perhaps what makes yogurt's story so extraordinary is its ability to reinvent itself with every passing generation. Greek varieties promised protein. Low-fat versions promised lighter choices. Fruit-filled alternatives promised indulgence without compromise. Entire industries emerged around carefully crafted messages designed to appeal to changing consumer priorities. Yet hidden beneath its fascinating history lies an important reminder that labels themselves often tell only part of a much larger story. After 50, many people discover that their understanding of food naturally becomes more nuanced than it once was. Words such as wholesome, natural, and low-fat begin inspiring entirely different questions than they did decades earlier. What most Americans never learned is that food marketing may be every bit as fascinating as food itself. Sometimes the greatest hidden truths are not concealed within laboratories or scientific journals. They are quietly hiding in plain sight upon the front of a package we have trusted for years. And if one refrigerator staple has repeatedly transformed its public image throughout history, the next food reveals how nostalgia itself became one of America's most powerful culinary ingredients. At number 32 waits a beloved tradition that has occupied kitchen counters and family celebrations for generations: commercially baked muffins. Long before oversized blueberry muffins appeared beside steaming cups of coffee in bustling cafes, their culinary ancestors represented something beautifully simple. Early American baking traditions celebrated modest recipes prepared carefully within family homes. Fresh ingredients, cherished traditions, and the unmistakable aroma of something baking in the oven became part of countless childhood memories stretching across generations. Modern America, however, possesses a remarkable talent for transforming simplicity into abundance. Somewhere along the way, muffins quietly became larger, sweeter, richer, and infinitely more elaborate than their humble predecessors could ever have imagined. What was once considered an occasional pleasure gradually evolved into something many Americans viewed as an ordinary breakfast companion. Hidden within this fascinating transformation is a larger story about how our expectations quietly change over time. Portions grow almost imperceptibly from one generation to the next. Familiar foods evolve alongside our lifestyles, until we scarcely remember where their stories began. After 50, these subtle historical changes become increasingly interesting because they invite us to look backward as well as forward. Sometimes understanding a food's hidden truths requires remembering what it once was before convenience, abundance, and modern expectations reshaped it entirely. Curiously enough, some of America's most fascinating culinary mysteries begin not with what was added, but with what quietly disappeared from memory along the way. Yet perhaps even more surprising is the remarkable journey of a product that has spent decades convincing Americans it belongs within the very definition of healthy living itself. At number 31 stands one of the most successful inventions of 20th century convenience, the bottled fruit smoothie. At first glance, its story appears wonderfully simple. Fruit has always occupied an honored place within American food traditions. Entire generations were encouraged to appreciate its colors, flavors, and remarkable diversity. The modern smoothie promised something seemingly irresistible: the goodness of fruit transformed into convenience itself. The timing could not have been more perfect. As modern lifestyles accelerated, consumers increasingly searched for foods capable of accompanying them throughout increasingly busy days. Bottled smoothies appeared to offer precisely that promise. They required no preparation, traveled effortlessly from kitchen counters to office desks, and quietly established themselves as symbols of contemporary wellness. Entire marketing campaigns celebrated their simplicity, while carefully reminding consumers of orchards, sunshine, and nature's abundance. Yet history reveals something fascinating about foods that become symbols of health. The more beloved their reputations become, the less likely we are to pause long enough to ask deeper questions about their remarkable journeys. What most people never stop to consider is that transforming something timeless into something convenient inevitably creates a story far more complicated than appearances alone might suggest. The relationship between tradition and technology has always produced fascinating results throughout American culinary history. After 50, hidden truths often become more meaningful precisely because experience teaches us that life's greatest lessons are rarely simple. Familiar foods deserve curiosity rather than assumptions. Their stories deserve patience rather than conclusions. And so our journey continues to grow more extraordinary. The hidden truths waiting ahead have accompanied Americans through road trips, family traditions, celebrations, and quiet moments shared around familiar tables for generations. Yet with every revelation, one question continues growing louder than the last. What else have we quietly accepted for decades without ever asking how its remarkable story truly began? By now, a fascinating pattern has begun to emerge. The greatest hidden truths are rarely hidden inside unfamiliar foods. More often than not, they are concealed within the products we stopped questioning decades ago. They become part of our routines, our traditions, and eventually our memories. Time grants them something extraordinarily valuable: our trust. And perhaps that is why the stories become increasingly remarkable as we continue this journey together. What lies ahead are foods that millions of Americans still welcome into their homes every single day, often without ever imagining the extraordinary histories quietly waiting beneath their familiar appearances. At number 30, we arrive at one of America's most celebrated symbols of convenience: the frozen diet meal. Few culinary inventions capture the optimism of 20th century America quite so perfectly. During the post-war years, the nation became captivated by the idea that technology could improve nearly every aspect of daily life. Kitchens transformed alongside automobiles, televisions, and household appliances. Suddenly, modern living promised something previous generations could scarcely imagine: a complete meal, carefully prepared and waiting patiently inside a freezer until needed. By the 1950s and 1960s, frozen dinners represented the future itself. Families gathered before glowing television screens, while aluminum trays divided meals into neat and orderly portions. Convenience was no longer simply desirable, it had become synonymous with progress. Decades later, an entirely new chapter emerged when diet versions began promising something equally irresistible: portion control, simplicity, and the comforting belief that healthy choices could fit effortlessly into even the busiest schedules. Yet hidden within this remarkable story lies a truth that few Americans ever stop to consider. The frozen meal has spent more than 70 years reinventing itself alongside our changing understanding of nutrition, aging, and wellness. Words such as balanced, light, wholesome, and healthy have quietly evolved across generations of packaging. What was celebrated in one decade often looks remarkably different in another. After 50, many people discover that satisfaction itself becomes more meaningful than convenience alone. The relationship between food and well-being grows increasingly personal and infinitely more fascinating. Perhaps the greatest hidden truth of all is that food is never simply food. It is also culture, history, and the story of what we once believed about ourselves. Yet, if modern convenience transformed dinner forever, America's pursuit of lighter choices produced an even more surprising culinary revolution. At number 29 waits a food that has quietly occupied countless refrigerators while carrying one of the most remarkable reputations in modern dietary history: fat-free flavored salad dressing. There was a time when Americans feared one particular word more than almost any other found upon a nutrition label. That word was fat. Entire decades were shaped by the pursuit of lighter alternatives. Grocery stores became monuments to reduction: reduced fat, low fat, fat-free, and millions embraced these changes with extraordinary enthusiasm. Salad dressing became one of the movement's greatest success stories. Familiar flavors remained, while something consumers had learned to avoid appeared to disappear almost entirely. It seemed almost too good to be true, a comforting compromise between indulgence and restraint. Few questioned how such transformations became possible because the promise itself was simply too appealing. What makes this story so fascinating is not merely the product itself, but the extraordinary influence of changing nutritional philosophies throughout American history. Foods have always reflected the beliefs of their time. The villains and heroes of one generation frequently exchange places in another. After 50, many Americans find themselves having lived through several entirely different nutritional eras, each one confidently proclaiming its own hidden truths. Curiously enough, history rarely rewards certainty. Instead, it repeatedly reminds us that understanding evolves with time. The greatest lesson hidden within familiar foods may simply be the importance of remaining curious enough to keep asking questions. And if America once learned to fear what foods contained, the next chapter reveals what happened when convenience transformed one of our oldest culinary companions into something entirely new. At number 28 lies an American favorite, whose story stretches back thousands of years: instant mashed potatoes. Potatoes themselves have traveled an extraordinary journey across civilizations before eventually becoming indispensable companions of the American dinner table. They have nourished pioneers, sustained families during difficult times, and appeared beside countless holiday feasts throughout our nation's history. Then came one of modern food science's most ingenious accomplishments. What if comfort itself could be preserved within a simple package, waiting patiently inside the pantry? Instant mashed potatoes promised precisely that. No peeling, no boiling, no waiting. Within moments, one of America's greatest comfort foods could appear almost magically upon the dinner table. For busy households, the innovation was nothing short of remarkable. Millions embraced it, not because they rejected tradition, but because they hoped to preserve it amidst increasingly complicated lives. Convenience has always been America's quiet love story. Yet hidden beneath its remarkable success lies something profoundly interesting about human nature itself. We are often willing to trade small pieces of yesterday for precious moments today. There is nothing inherently mysterious about that exchange. It is simply part of modern living. After 50, however, Nostalgia often invites us to rediscover what we loved most about familiar traditions in the first place. Sometimes it was never merely about the food itself, but the stories shared while preparing it. Time quietly teaches us that some comforts are difficult to measure. And speaking of comfort, few foods have inspired quite as much affection among generations of Americans as the next familiar favorite waiting patiently upon grocery store shelves. At number 27 stands commercially prepared flavored coffee creamer. Its story is inseparable from America's extraordinary relationship with coffee itself. For generations, kitchens awakened each morning to the unmistakable sound of coffee brewing before sunrise. Conversations began beside steaming mugs long before the rest of the world had stirred from sleep. Coffee became ritual, tradition, and companionship all at once. Creamers transformed alongside American tastes. Vanilla, hazelnut, caramel, cinnamon. The possibilities seemed endless. Suddenly, everyday mornings felt just a little more indulgent, without requiring anything more complicated than opening a familiar bottle waiting quietly within the refrigerator. What few people ever realize is that flavored creamers reveal something remarkable about modern food culture. They are not merely additions to coffee, they are additions to experience itself. Their extraordinary success was built upon something infinitely more powerful than convenience alone. They offered familiarity, consistency, and comfort regardless of what awaited us beyond our front doors. After 50, morning rituals often become increasingly meaningful precisely because they have accompanied us for so much of our lives. Yet hidden within those cherished routines are stories still waiting patiently to be discovered. And perhaps nowhere is America's enduring affection for comfort more beautifully expressed than within the next culinary tradition. At number 26 waits a beloved companion of celebrations, stretching back generations: commercially prepared pancake syrup. Long before brightly colored bottles occupied supermarket shelves, maple syrup possessed an extraordinary history deeply connected to the North American continent itself. Indigenous peoples carefully gathered sap centuries before European settlers ever understood its remarkable possibilities. What followed became one of America's oldest culinary traditions. Modern pancake syrup tells an entirely different but equally fascinating story, that of innovation, accessibility, and changing expectations. It made familiar comforts available to millions while creating traditions uniquely its own. Saturday mornings became sweeter, childhood memories became richer. Entire generations learned to associate its unmistakable aroma with warmth, family, and treasured moments impossible to forget. Yet time quietly reveals that foods often become something greater than their ingredients alone. They become emotional landmarks scattered throughout our lives. After 50, perhaps that truth becomes more meaningful than ever before. Hidden truths are not always warnings waiting patiently in the shadows. Sometimes they are invitations to understand familiar stories more deeply than we ever imagined possible. And finally, at number 25, our journey reaches one of the most fascinating contradictions in modern American food history: fruit-flavored snack bars marketed as wholesome alternatives. Their rise reflects something profoundly human. We wish to preserve life's simplest pleasures while simultaneously embracing healthier possibilities. Few aspirations are more universal than that. Manufacturers understood something remarkable about American consumers. We are deeply moved by words such as orchard, harvest, whole grain, and naturally inspired. Such language evokes memories far older than advertising itself. It reminds us of simpler times, family traditions, and the enduring comfort of foods connected, however loosely, to nature's abundance. Hidden within their extraordinary popularity lies an important lesson that continues revealing itself throughout this documentary. Familiar foods are rarely as simple as they first appear. Their stories are shaped not only by ingredients and innovations, but also by history, culture, nostalgia, and the remarkable evolution of what each generation hopes food will provide. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is discovering that curiosity need never grow old. The foods we have trusted for decades still possess remarkable stories waiting patiently to be uncovered. And as extraordinary as these revelations have been, what awaits beyond this moment ventures even deeper into America's hidden culinary history. The next discoveries will challenge assumptions millions continue carrying into their kitchens every single day. Their stories become more remarkable, their hidden truths grow more fascinating, and somewhere ahead lies a revelation so unexpected that it has quietly remained hidden in plain sight for generations. As our journey moves deeper into America's hidden culinary history, the stories begin changing in a fascinating way. Earlier foods revealed how convenience reshaped traditions. The discoveries ahead reveal something even more intriguing, how reputation itself can become one of the most powerful ingredients ever added to a product. By the time a food earns the trust of millions, its story often becomes far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. And nowhere is that more evident than with the foods waiting in this next chapter. At number 24 sits a refrigerator staple that has quietly built a reputation as one of the healthiest snacks in modern America: fruit on the bottom yogurt. For decades, yogurt's image has grown stronger with every passing generation. It has been featured in wellness magazines, television commercials, and grocery store displays, carefully designed to suggest freshness, vitality, and balance. Yet hidden within its story is a remarkable transformation few consumers ever witnessed. Traditional yogurt was once prized primarily for its simplicity. In many parts of the world, it contained only a handful of recognizable ingredients. Its appeal came from tradition rather than innovation. America, however, rarely leaves successful products unchanged. As competition intensified, manufacturers searched for ways to make yogurt more appealing to increasingly diverse tastes. Fruit was added, sweetness increased, textures became smoother, flavors multiplied. Entire supermarket aisles emerged where a few humble containers once stood. What makes this story so fascinating after 50 is that many people still view yogurt through the lens of its original reputation rather than its modern evolution. Hidden truths often emerge not because a food suddenly changes, but because its image remains frozen in time while the product quietly continues evolving. And if reputation can become powerful enough to outlive reality, the next food may be one of the greatest examples America has ever seen. At number 23, we encounter vegetable juice cocktails, products that have spent decades convincing Americans that drinking vegetables might be as simple as twisting off a cap. Their story begins with one of the most admirable goals in food history: making nutrition more accessible. During the 20th century, food manufacturers became increasingly interested in creating products that could fit seamlessly into modern schedules. As life accelerated, convenience became essential. Vegetable juices seemed to offer a remarkably elegant solution. Busy professionals, travelers, and health-conscious consumers could carry vegetables with them almost anywhere. What most Americans never realized is how much effort was devoted to making these beverages appealing to the average palate. Vegetables have always possessed strong personalities of their own. Some are earthy, some are bitter, others have flavors that require time to appreciate. Creating a product that millions would willingly drink every day demanded innovation, experimentation, and careful refinement. After 50, many people begin recognizing that nutrition and marketing often travel side by side through American food history. One rarely exists without the other. The hidden truth isn't necessarily found inside the bottle itself, but in understanding how products earn their extraordinary reputations over time. Yet, as interesting as liquid vegetables may be, the next story explores something even more surprising: a food category that managed to convince millions of Americans they were making healthier choices while enjoying something that felt remarkably indulgent. At number 22 waits reduced fat-flavored crackers. At first glance, they seem almost impossible to criticize. They are convenient, portable, and often marketed as lighter alternatives to more indulgent snacks. Yet their story reveals one of the most fascinating chapters in modern American food culture. During the late 20th century, grocery stores became battlegrounds for nutritional claims. Reduced fat, low cholesterol, light, lean. Entire product lines emerged to satisfy growing consumer demand for healthier options. What many Americans never noticed was how dramatically packaging itself began shaping purchasing decisions. Certain words acquired almost magical influence over consumer behavior. Products carrying these labels often benefited from a powerful psychological effect. People viewed them differently before even tasting them. Expectations changed. Perceptions changed. Sometimes eating habits changed as well. After 50, this hidden truth becomes particularly fascinating because it reveals how easily even intelligent consumers can be influenced by familiar narratives. Food companies did not simply sell crackers. They sold reassurance. They sold convenience. They sold confidence. Understanding that distinction may be one of the most valuable lessons hidden within modern grocery stores. And as revealing as this story may be, the next chapter takes us into territory where nostalgia and trust become even more influential. At number 21 stands one of America's most beloved lunchtime traditions: canned soup. Few foods possess such deep emotional connections. During difficult winters, economic hardships, family illnesses, and countless ordinary afternoons, soup provided comfort when people needed it most. Entire generations grew up associating its familiar aroma with warmth, care, and security. Few culinary inventions have embedded themselves so deeply into the American experience. The rise of canned soup was nothing short of revolutionary. Preservation technologies allowed families to store meals for extended periods while reducing preparation time. For busy households, this innovation felt miraculous. Advertisements celebrated convenience, reliability, and family values. Over time, canned soup became more than a product. It became part of American culture itself. Yet hidden within this remarkable history lies a subtle truth about familiarity. The longer something remains part of our lives, the less likely we are to examine it closely. We assume we already know its story. We believe there is nothing left to discover. But history often rewards curiosity. After 50, many people begin revisiting long-held assumptions and finding surprises where they least expected them. The greatest hidden truths frequently emerge from the foods we know best. And if canned soup earned trust through generations of comfort, the next food built its reputation through something even more powerful: the promise of health itself. At number 20, we arrive at flavored rice cakes, a product that became one of the defining symbols of late 20th century diet culture. There was a time when rice cakes appeared almost everywhere. Offices, kitchen pantries, gym bags, and break rooms across America stocked them in astonishing quantities. Their popularity reflected an era obsessed with simplicity, restraint, and calorie-conscious choices. They were light, they were convenient. Most importantly, they felt virtuous. What makes their story so fascinating is how dramatically public perception has changed over time. Foods that once symbolized discipline later became examples of how nutritional understanding can evolve. The rice cake itself remained largely unchanged. What shifted was the conversation surrounding it. Questions became more sophisticated. Expectations became more nuanced. Consumers began looking beyond simple labels and marketing slogans. After 50, this evolution feels particularly meaningful because many Americans lived through these changing nutritional eras firsthand. They witnessed experts reverse positions, trends rise and fall, and products repeatedly reinvent themselves. Hidden truths are often hidden not because information is unavailable, but because conventional wisdom changes more quickly than memory. Yet even the story of rice cakes pales beside what awaits at number 19. At number 19 stands one of the most successful breakfast inventions of the modern era: sweetened instant breakfast drinks. Their rise reflects America's enduring desire to simplify life's daily routines. Breakfast has always occupied a special place within American culture. For generations, it was considered the foundation of the day. Yet as schedules grew busier, millions found themselves searching for alternatives to traditional morning meals. Instant breakfast drinks appeared to solve a problem that countless households faced. They were quick, portable, convenient. Their marketing often emphasized energy, vitality, and nutritional completeness. For many consumers, they represented an elegant compromise between ideal habits and real-world demands. What most people never stop to consider is how profoundly these products reflect the era that created them. They are not merely beverages, they are symbols of a society constantly searching for ways to save time without sacrificing health. Their popularity tells us as much about American culture as it does about food itself, and perhaps that is the most fascinating hidden truth revealed so far. The foods we choose often reveal more than nutritional preferences. They reveal hopes, fears, priorities, and the values of entire generations. After 50, understanding those deeper stories becomes increasingly rewarding. Yet, as extraordinary as these discoveries have been, they merely prepare us for what lies ahead. The next foods do not simply challenge assumptions, they begin uncovering some of the most surprising contradictions in modern American food history. Stories that few people have ever heard, despite encountering these products almost every day of their lives. If there is one hidden truth that continues revealing itself throughout America's culinary history, it is this: the foods we trust most are often the ones whose stories we know least. Time has a remarkable way of transforming conveniences into traditions, and traditions into unquestioned habits. By now, perhaps you've noticed that these discoveries are becoming increasingly surprising. That is no accident. The hidden truths waiting ahead occupy a very different place in American life. They earned something more valuable than popularity. They earned our confidence. At number 18 stands America's beloved flavored bottled iced tea. There was a time when iced tea represented something beautifully simple. A pitcher resting quietly on the porch during long summer afternoons, while conversations drifted lazily beneath the warm American sun. It became inseparable from family gatherings, backyard celebrations, and cherished memories stretching back generations. Yet modern America discovered something extraordinary. Tradition could travel. Suddenly, iced tea no longer belonged exclusively within kitchens and family recipes. It arrived chilled, sweetened, flavored, and perfectly prepared for increasingly busy lives. Lemon became peach. Peach became raspberry. Entire refrigerator shelves quietly filled with products carrying the comforting reputation of tea itself. What makes this story particularly fascinating after 50 is that our memories often preserve foods exactly as we first knew them, even when they have continued evolving for decades. Hidden within this colorful bottle is not merely a beverage, but a remarkable story about how nostalgia and convenience quietly became perfect companions. And if America transformed tea into something wonderfully modern, the next food reveals what happened when one of our oldest culinary pleasures became even more irresistible. At number 17 waits commercially prepared frozen waffles, a product whose history mirrors the extraordinary rise of convenience itself. Long before frozen foods became household staples, waffles occupied a place reserved for special mornings. They required patience, preparation, and time shared together around the breakfast table. Their origins stretch back centuries before eventually becoming woven into the fabric of American family life. Then came one of the 20th century's greatest culinary innovations. Suddenly, breakfast traditions could emerge from the freezer in moments rather than hours. Entire generations grew up believing that comfort and convenience were no longer separate experiences. What few Americans ever stop to consider is that frozen waffles represent something much larger than breakfast itself. They symbolize our remarkable ability to preserve familiar experiences while adapting them to entirely new ways of living. After 50, many people quietly rediscover that food has always been about more than efficiency. It is about memory, it is about ritual, and sometimes hidden truths are found simply by remembering where our favorite traditions first began. Yet perhaps even more surprising is what happened when America decided that dessert itself deserved to become an everyday companion. At number 16 lies flavored coffeehouse-style bottled beverages. Their story would have seemed almost impossible to imagine only a few generations ago. Coffee once represented simplicity, a humble morning ritual shared quietly before the day began. Yet modern food culture transformed it into something infinitely more elaborate. Vanilla became caramel, chocolate became mocha. Familiar routines became carefully crafted experiences carried conveniently from refrigerator shelves to office desks across the country. Entire industries emerged around the extraordinary idea that comfort itself could be bottled and enjoyed anywhere, at any time. Hidden within this remarkable transformation lies something profoundly interesting about human nature. We do not simply purchase products, we preserve rituals. Morning traditions possess extraordinary emotional power, particularly after decades of accompanying us through life's most meaningful moments. After 50, those rituals often become increasingly precious because they quietly remind us of where we have been as much as where we are going. The story of flavored coffee beverages is not merely one of innovation. It is a fascinating reflection of how America continues reinventing familiar comforts without ever completely letting go of the traditions that inspired them. And if modern life transformed something as timeless as coffee, the next revelation explores one of the greatest contradictions in contemporary food history. At number 15, we arrive at flavored protein bars marketed toward healthy aging. Their rise tells one of the most remarkable stories of modern American wellness culture. There was a time when protein occupied relatively little space in everyday nutritional conversations outside athletic communities. Today, however, it has become one of the most celebrated words found upon supermarket shelves. Products promising vitality, strength, and active living continue multiplying each year, particularly among consumers interested in maintaining their health throughout the decades ahead. What makes this hidden truth so fascinating is that many of these products are designed not merely to nourish, but to reassure. They promise convenience without compromise, and simplicity amidst increasingly complicated conversations about aging well. Yet history teaches us something extraordinarily valuable. The language surrounding health changes continuously from one generation to the next. Foods frequently become symbols of ideas much larger than themselves. After 50, perhaps no lesson is more important than remaining curious enough to recognize when reputation quietly begins overshadowing reality. Understanding how products earn our trust may prove every bit as fascinating as understanding what they contain. And remarkably enough, the story waiting ahead has occupied American lunchboxes for generations, while quietly preserving one of history's most surprising transformations. At number 14 sits packaged applesauce cups, a food that has traveled an extraordinary journey from traditional kitchens to modern convenience. Apples themselves occupy an almost sacred place within American history. They symbolize harvest, abundance, and simplicity. Entire childhoods have been accompanied by familiar sayings celebrating their timeless reputation. Applesauce inherited that remarkable legacy while simultaneously reinventing itself for modern life. Portable containers replaced family recipes. New flavors appeared alongside cherished traditions. What once simmered patiently upon stovetops became something available almost anywhere at any moment. Hidden within its fascinating story lies an important reminder that familiarity possesses extraordinary persuasive power. The longer we associate foods with cherished memories, the more effortlessly they earn our confidence. After 50, many people discover that curiosity itself becomes one of life's greatest gifts. Familiar foods quietly become invitations to understand our own histories more deeply than ever before. And as comforting as apples may be, the final revelation within this chapter uncovers a culinary tradition whose extraordinary popularity continues, spanning generations of American life. At number 13, Waite's flavored instant soup cups, a product that perfectly captures America's enduring relationship with convenience and comfort. Few foods have demonstrated such remarkable adaptability throughout modern history. Whether accompanying long workdays, college studies, road trips, or quiet evenings at home, instant soups have quietly established themselves as dependable companions of everyday life. Their extraordinary success reflects something profoundly human. We continue searching for familiar comforts capable of accompanying us wherever life may lead. Warmth, simplicity, and reassurance remain timeless desires, regardless of how dramatically the world around us changes. Yet perhaps the greatest hidden truth revealed by their story is that convenience itself has become one of the defining characteristics of modern culinary history. We are not merely preserving foods, we are preserving experiences. After 50, hidden truths often become increasingly meaningful because they invite us to appreciate the remarkable journeys our favorite traditions have traveled across generations. And if the discoveries revealed so far have been surprising, what awaits in the chapters ahead ventures even deeper into America's most fascinating culinary mysteries. The foods waiting there possess stories so extraordinary that millions continue overlooking them every single day, despite welcoming them into their homes year after year. There is something extraordinary that happens when we begin looking backward. The foods we have trusted for decades slowly begin revealing stories that are far richer than we ever imagined. What began as a journey through convenience and nostalgia has quietly become something much larger, a documentary about trust itself. Perhaps the greatest hidden truths are not hidden because they are impossible to discover. Rather, they remain hidden because familiarity teaches us to stop asking questions. The foods waiting ahead have earned something remarkably difficult to obtain. They have earned generations of confidence, and that may be precisely what makes their stories so fascinating. At number 12 stands one of America's oldest and most celebrated traditions: commercial fruit juice sold as an everyday health beverage. Long before refrigerators occupied American kitchens, fruit represented nature's extraordinary generosity. Entire generations were taught that fruit belonged among life's simplest pleasures. When advances in preservation and packaging eventually made fruit juices available throughout the year, they were celebrated as remarkable achievements of modern living. Breakfast tables changed forever. Orange juice became almost synonymous with the American morning itself. Advertisements painted pictures of sunshine, orchards, and vibrant beginnings to each new day. Few foods possess such enduring emotional connections. What makes this hidden truth so fascinating after 50 is not the juice itself, but the extraordinary power of reputation. For decades, many Americans viewed fruit juice through the lens of its origins rather than its modern journey. Familiarity became inseparable from trust. Hidden within its remarkable story lies an important reminder that foods continue evolving long after our perceptions of them remain unchanged. Sometimes the stories we inherit quietly become more influential than the products sitting before us. After 50, perhaps no lesson is more valuable than recognizing that curiosity remains timeless. And if one beloved breakfast tradition has quietly accompanied Americans through generations of change, the next revelation explores what happened when convenience transformed one of humanity's oldest foods into something entirely different. At number 11, Waite's commercially flavored dried fruit snacks. Their story begins thousands of years before modern grocery stores ever existed. Ancient civilizations preserved fruits not merely for convenience, but for survival itself. Drying was among humanity's oldest culinary innovations, allowing harvests to endure long after seasons had passed. There was something beautifully simple about that tradition. Time itself became an ingredient. Modern America inherited this remarkable history and gradually reshaped it to suit increasingly busy lives. Portable packages replaced pantry jars. New flavors emerged alongside ancient traditions. Products promising wholesome indulgence quietly earned their places within lunchboxes, desk drawers, and kitchen cabinets across the nation. Yet history tells a remarkably fascinating story when we pause long enough to listen carefully. Foods possessing centuries of tradition often carry reputations that seem almost impossible to challenge. We associate them not only with nourishment, but with continuity itself. Hidden truths frequently emerge precisely where confidence runs deepest. After 50, many people discover that understanding where foods began proves every bit as fascinating as understanding where they eventually arrived. And speaking of arrivals, the next chapter reveals one of the greatest success stories in American food history. A product that spent decades convincing millions that health and indulgence need never exist separately. At number 10 lies flavored granola, marketed for healthy lifestyles. Few foods have undergone such extraordinary transformations throughout modern American history. Granola began its remarkable journey during 19th century wellness movements that celebrated simplicity, nature, and mindful living. Its earliest forms would appear almost unrecognizable beside the colorful varieties occupying today's supermarket shelves. What began as humble combinations of grains gradually evolved into one of the defining symbols of contemporary wellness culture. Honey-roasted varieties appeared beside chocolate-infused creations. Ancient grains joined familiar favorites. Entire product lines emerged promising energy, vitality, and wholesome satisfaction. Perhaps what makes granola's story particularly remarkable is that it reflects America's changing relationship with health itself. Every generation quietly redefines what wellness looks like, tastes like, and feels like. Foods that successfully adapt to those changing expectations often become cultural icons rather than simple products. After 50, however, many Americans find themselves uniquely positioned to appreciate these transformations because they have witnessed them unfold across decades of experience. The hidden truths waiting within familiar foods frequently reveal as much about society as they do about nutrition itself. Yet, if granola became a symbol of modern wellness, the next revelation uncovers a product whose extraordinary popularity has quietly spanned nearly every generation alive today. At number 9 stands processed cheese spreads and individually wrapped cheese products, perhaps one of the most fascinating culinary inventions of the 20th century. There was a time when preserving cheese represented a genuine challenge for households across America. Advances in food science eventually changed that reality forever. Suddenly, consistency became possible. Products could travel farther, last longer, and deliver familiar flavors regardless of where they were purchased. Entire generations grew up associating these products with childhood lunches, family road trips, and comforting traditions shared around dinner tables throughout the nation. What few Americans ever stop to consider is that processed foods frequently possess histories every bit as remarkable as their traditional counterparts. Their stories are often narratives of ingenuity, adaptation, and changing expectations, rather than simple culinary evolution. After 50, these hidden truths become increasingly meaningful because they remind us that food is inseparable from the historical moments that shaped it. What one generation celebrates as innovation may inspire entirely different conversations decades later. Time quietly reshapes not only foods themselves, but our understanding of what they represent. Yet, remarkable as processed cheese may be, the discovery waiting ahead ventures into territory where nostalgia becomes almost impossible to resist. At number 8 waits America's beloved flavored ice cream novelties. Few foods possess the extraordinary emotional power of ice cream. Entire childhood summers are hidden within its familiar flavors. Family celebrations, first dates, county fairs, and cherished moments stretching back generations remain forever intertwined with its remarkable story. Ice cream itself predates the United States by centuries, eventually becoming one of America's greatest culinary love stories. Modern food science merely expanded the possibilities beyond anything previous generations could have imagined. Suddenly, indulgence arrived in countless shapes, flavors, and convenient forms, waiting patiently within freezer aisles across the country. Hidden within its fascinating journey lies something profoundly human. Foods do not merely nourish our bodies, they preserve our memories. After 50, perhaps nostalgia itself becomes one of life's greatest pleasures, precisely because it reminds us that certain experiences remain timeless, regardless of how dramatically the world changes around us. Yet nostalgia occasionally possesses extraordinary persuasive power. Familiar pleasures quietly earn our confidence simply because they have accompanied us faithfully throughout life's most meaningful moments. Understanding that hidden truth may forever change how we look at the foods that have traveled beside us for decades. And if childhood memories can shape our relationship with food so profoundly, the next revelation explores one of the most remarkable examples of convenience ever created. At number 7 stands sweetened flavored breakfast shakes, marketed for active adults. Their extraordinary rise reflects one of modern life's greatest challenges: the constant search for balance between time, health, and simplicity. Entire industries have emerged promising solutions capable of fitting effortlessly into increasingly busy schedules. Breakfast, once patiently prepared and shared around family tables, has gradually transformed alongside the rhythms of contemporary life. Portable nutrition became not merely desirable, but increasingly essential for millions of Americans. What makes their story particularly fascinating is that they represent something far larger than convenience alone. They symbolize our enduring hope that life's complexities might occasionally be simplified without sacrifice. Their popularity continues growing because they speak directly to universal human desires: vitality, independence, and the ability to embrace each new day with confidence. After 50, those aspirations become increasingly meaningful. Health is no longer merely about numbers or nutritional labels. It becomes deeply connected to quality of life itself. The quiet moments we treasure, the traditions we preserve, and the years we hope remain waiting ahead. Hidden truths matter because they invite us to remain curious enough to continue learning, regardless of how familiar something may seem. And now, we stand remarkably close to the final revelations of this journey. What waits ahead are not merely interesting stories hidden within familiar foods. They are the discoveries that millions of Americans continue overlooking every single day, despite encountering them throughout their lives. Their histories are more surprising, their hidden truths are more extraordinary, and somewhere among the final chapters lies a revelation so unexpected that it may forever change the way we think about one of America's most trusted culinary traditions. We have traveled together through generations of American food history, uncovering hidden stories, quietly waiting beneath familiar labels and cherished traditions. Yet the revelations awaiting us now are different. These final discoveries are not merely fascinating, they reveal something far more profound about how we came to trust the foods that accompany us throughout our lives. The greatest hidden truths are seldom hidden inside mysterious products from distant places. More often, they are concealed within the ordinary things we stopped questioning decades ago. And perhaps nowhere is that truth more remarkable than within these final 6 chapters. At number 6 stands America's beloved flavored bottled sports drink. There was a time when these brightly colored beverages occupied a very different place in American life. They were created with remarkably specific purposes in mind and earned extraordinary reputations through decades of careful innovation. Over time, however, something fascinating happened. Products once associated with extraordinary circumstances quietly became everyday companions for millions of Americans. Refrigerators filled with familiar bottles, promising refreshment, vitality, and renewal. Entire generations learned to associate their vibrant colors and comforting flavors with active living itself. What few Americans ever stop to consider is how profoundly food culture can reshape the original purpose of a product. History repeatedly reveals that convenience possesses an extraordinary ability to transform occasional choices into daily rituals. After 50, Many people begin appreciating that hidden truth more than ever before. Foods and beverages often tell two stories simultaneously: the story of why they were created and the story of how we eventually learned to use them. Those stories are not always identical, and if something as familiar as a sports drink can quietly evolve across generations, the next revelation explores one of America's greatest culinary success stories, a product whose reputation became almost impossible to question. At number 5, Waite's commercially prepared, flavored nut mixes marketed for heart-healthy lifestyles. Few foods have experienced such a remarkable transformation in public perception throughout recent decades. Nuts themselves possess ancient histories stretching across civilizations long before America existed. They symbolize abundance, celebration, and nourishment throughout countless culinary traditions. Modern food culture embraced that remarkable heritage while gradually introducing something entirely new: convenience wrapped carefully inside familiar promises of wholesome living. What makes their story particularly fascinating is not what they are, but how effortlessly modern lifestyles can reshape ancient traditions. Somewhere along the way, products inspired by simplicity occasionally become surprisingly elaborate. Flavorings become increasingly creative. Packaging grows increasingly persuasive. Consumers inherit not merely foods, but narratives that accompany them. The language surrounding wellness quietly becomes part of the experience itself. After 50, hidden truths frequently reveal themselves through the smallest questions imaginable. Is this food still what previous generations would recognize? Has convenience quietly changed more than we ever realized? History rarely offers simple answers, but it consistently rewards curiosity. And speaking of curiosity, the next revelation uncovers one of America's most beloved culinary companions, a product that has occupied breakfast tables and family gatherings for generations, while quietly preserving one of modern food history's most fascinating contradictions. At number 4 lies commercially prepared flavored cream cheese spreads. Their story begins with one of humanity's oldest culinary traditions. Cheese itself has accompanied civilizations for thousands of years, long before modern kitchens transformed familiar comforts into convenient companions of contemporary life. Bagels and cream cheese became woven into the fabric of American mornings. Family traditions quietly formed around simple pleasures shared before busy days began. Yet modern food history possesses an extraordinary talent for reinvention. Garden vegetables became flavors, fruits became companions, desserts inspired entirely new varieties. What was once beautifully uncomplicated gradually evolved into something infinitely more imaginative than previous generations could ever have envisioned. There is nothing inherently surprising about innovation itself. Rather, the hidden truth lies in recognizing how effortlessly familiarity earns our trust, regardless of how dramatically products continue evolving over time. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is discovering that curiosity itself remains timeless. Understanding where our favorite foods began often proves every bit as fascinating as understanding where they eventually arrived. Yet if familiarity quietly shapes our confidence, the next discovery reveals something even more extraordinary: the remarkable influence of nostalgia upon our everyday choices. At number 3 stands commercially prepared frozen dessert bars, marketed as lighter alternatives to traditional treats. Their rise reflects one of the most fascinating themes hidden throughout this documentary: the enduring American belief that perhaps we need not choose between comfort and compromise. For generations, innovation has promised precisely that possibility. The familiar pleasures we cherish might simply become lighter, easier, and better suited to modern living. These products succeeded not merely because they tasted pleasant or fit conveniently within busy schedules. They succeeded because they spoke directly to something profoundly human. They preserved moments: summer evenings shared upon front porches, celebrations among friends and family, the simple joy of enjoying familiar traditions that have quietly accompanied us across decades of life. What most people never realize is that nostalgia itself may be among the most powerful influences upon our relationship with food. Familiar experiences possess extraordinary emotional weight, precisely because they remind us of who we once were and how far we have traveled. After 50, that hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful. Food is rarely just food. It is memory carefully preserved across generations. And yet, remarkable as nostalgia may be, the discovery waiting at number 2 reveals something even more surprising. A hidden truth that millions of Americans encounter every single morning without ever pausing long enough to notice it. At number 2 waits America's extraordinary love affair with foods marketed simply as healthy. Few words possess greater persuasive power within modern grocery stores than that single familiar promise. Healthy became wholesome. Wholesome became natural. Natural became nourishing. Entire industries quietly emerged around carefully chosen language designed to reassure consumers that they were making thoughtful choices for themselves and their families. History teaches us something remarkable about every generation that came before us. They were not careless. They were not uninformed. They simply trusted the best information available at the time. Nutritional philosophies evolved. Scientific conversations changed. Products transformed alongside them. What one generation celebrated as revolutionary occasionally becomes something entirely different in the eyes of another. Perhaps the greatest hidden truth revealed throughout this journey is that labels alone rarely tell complete stories. Foods are infinitely more fascinating than the promises printed upon their packaging. After 50, curiosity may become one of life's greatest companions precisely because it reminds us that there is always something new left to discover. Yet, extraordinary as that revelation may be, it merely prepares us for the final hidden truth waiting patiently at the end of this documentary. And now we arrive at number 1. The greatest hidden truth of them all is not a single food resting quietly upon a supermarket shelf. It is something far more remarkable than that. Number 1 is America's extraordinary relationship with ultra-processed foods that successfully disguise themselves as symbols of health, comfort, convenience, and tradition, all at once. For generations, Americans were taught to separate foods neatly into categories: healthy and unhealthy, good and bad, modern and traditional. Yet history quietly reveals something infinitely more fascinating than such simple distinctions could ever capture. The foods we trust most frequently borrow pieces of every story we wish to believe about ourselves. They remind us of childhood while promising modern convenience. They celebrate tradition while embracing innovation. They wear the language of wellness while preserving the comforts we have cherished throughout our lives. That is why this final revelation matters so profoundly after 50. The greatest hidden truths were never hiding within a single ingredient or one mysterious product all along. They were hiding in plain sight, in our assumptions. They were hiding within the comforting belief that familiarity alone guarantees understanding. They were hiding within decades of advertisements, traditions, and carefully preserved memories, quietly teaching us that we already knew everything worth knowing about the foods we welcomed into our homes. Yet history tells a different story. The remarkable truth revealed throughout this documentary is that curiosity never grows old. There is no age at which we stop learning. There is no decade of life beyond which hidden truths cease waiting patiently to be discovered. The foods that accompanied our childhoods continue teaching us new lessons. The traditions we inherited remain every bit as fascinating today as they were generations ago. Perhaps that is the greatest reward waiting at the end of this journey. Not fear, not perfection, but perspective. Because growing older does not simply mean accumulating years. It means gaining the extraordinary privilege of seeing familiar things through entirely new eyes. And sometimes, the greatest hidden truths are not the ones that forever change what we place upon our tables. They are the ones that forever change how we choose to remain curious about the remarkable stories quietly waiting there. Here's the final chapter of our journey together. If there is one hidden truth that has quietly revealed itself throughout this documentary, it is that the most remarkable stories are rarely found in the extraordinary. More often, they are hidden within the ordinary things that have patiently accompanied us through the decades of our lives. For generations, Americans gathered around familiar tables, surrounded by familiar foods. They celebrated birthdays with them. They carried them to work in lunchboxes. They shared them during holidays, road trips, summer afternoons, and quiet Sunday mornings. These foods became more than meals. They became memories. Somewhere between childhood and growing older, they quietly became part of who we are. Perhaps that is why their stories are so fascinating. This journey was never really about discovering 42 foods hidden away behind mysterious warnings or forgotten secrets. It was something far more meaningful than that. It was a journey through American history itself, a story of innovation, tradition, convenience, curiosity, and the extraordinary ways our understanding continues evolving with every passing generation. The greatest surprise waiting at the end of this documentary may be that nothing we discovered today was truly about fear. History rarely rewards fear. Instead, it rewards curiosity. For decades, many of us were taught to think about food in simple terms: healthy or unhealthy, good or bad, traditional or modern. Yet time quietly reminds us that life is rarely so uncomplicated. The foods that accompany us throughout our lives are often far more remarkable than the labels attached to them. They carry histories stretching back centuries. They tell stories about changing traditions, scientific discoveries, cultural movements, and the endless human desire to create better, simpler, and more comforting experiences for ourselves and those we love. And perhaps that is why reaching the age of 50 feels different than any decade that came before it. There is something extraordinary about looking backward while continuing to look forward at the same time. The memories become richer, the questions become more meaningful. The ordinary things we once overlooked slowly begin revealing hidden details we never thought to notice before. After 50, curiosity becomes one of life's greatest privileges. We begin asking different questions, not because we fear growing older, but because we understand something previous generations quietly discovered long ago. Growing older is not merely the passage of time, it is the accumulation of wisdom, perspective, and an ever-deepening appreciation for the remarkable stories hidden within everyday life. The truth is, our grandparents lived during one nutritional era. Our parents experienced another. We have witnessed several ourselves. Ideas changed, foods evolved, scientific conversations continued unfolding across generations. What was celebrated yesterday was reconsidered today, and what we understand today will undoubtedly continue evolving tomorrow. There is something wonderfully humbling about that realization. It reminds us that curiosity is infinitely more valuable than certainty. The hidden truths revealed throughout this documentary were never simply waiting inside grocery stores or quietly resting upon kitchen shelves. They were waiting inside the questions we had stopped asking. They were waiting inside familiar routines we inherited without ever imagining how extraordinary their histories might be. Perhaps the greatest hidden truth of all is that learning itself has no expiration date. There is no age beyond which wonder disappears. No moment in life when curiosity quietly packs its bags and leaves us behind. In many ways, the opposite becomes true. The longer we live, the more remarkable ordinary things begin to seem. A simple breakfast suddenly becomes a story stretching across continents and centuries. A familiar family tradition reveals hidden chapters of American history. Foods we have known our entire lives quietly remind us that there is always something more waiting patiently to be discovered. And maybe that is why documentaries like this continue captivating us. Not because they teach us to fear what is familiar, but because they teach us to look at familiar things with fresh eyes. Somewhere tonight, millions of Americans will gather around dinner tables much like they have for generations before them. There will be stories shared between husbands and wives, laughter echoing through kitchens, and memories quietly being created for the generations still waiting to come. Food will continue doing what it has always done, bringing people together in ways far greater than we sometimes remember to appreciate. Its stories are still being written, and so are ours. Long after today's hidden truths have faded into memory, perhaps one question will remain. What other remarkable stories have been patiently waiting within the ordinary things we pass by every single day without ever stopping long enough to wonder? History has a curious habit of keeping its greatest secrets hidden in plain sight. Sometimes they are found in ancient books, sometimes they are discovered in forgotten places, and sometimes they are waiting quietly beside tomorrow morning's breakfast, asking us to remain curious enough to listen. Because the greatest hidden truths are not the ones that change what we know, they are the ones that remind us there is always more left to discover.